On August 7, 2024, Arthur Lee Burton was executed by the state of Texas. He was 56 years old at the time of his death. The method used was lethal injection. His time of death was recorded as 6:47 p.m. This marked the third execution carried out by Texas in 2024. 4 additional men remain scheduled for execution in the state, 3 later in 2024 and 1 in 2025. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The crime for which Arthur Lee Burton was executed occurred in 1997. The victim was Nancy Adleman, a Houston jogger and mother of 3. She was attacked near her home along a bayou jogging trail in Houston. The nature of the crime was murder and attempted rape. Nancy Adleman was brutally beaten and strangled. The weapon used for the strangulation was her own shoelaces. Her body was discovered the following morning in a wooded area near the trail. The body showed signs of a severe beating, and her shorts and underwear had been discarded. This case was widely described as a worst nightmare for women exercising alone. Initially, Burton denied killing Adleman. However, he later confessed to the crime. In his confession, he admitted to attacking her, dragging her into the woods, and choking her until she was unconscious. Years later, Burton would argue that this confession was coerced. This claim became a point of contention in his subsequent legal battles. Arthur Lee Burton was convicted of the murder of Nancy Adleman. He was first sentenced to death in 1998. This sentence set in motion decades of appeals and legal challenges. The basis of Arthur Lee Burton's final appeal was a claim of intellectual disability. Under established legal precedent, intellectual disability renders a person ineligible for the death penalty. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2002 that executing individuals with intellectual disabilities constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, violating the Eighth Amendment. Intellectual disability is one of 2 categorical bars to the death penalty recognized by the Supreme Court. The other is being under the age of 18 at the time the crime was committed. Burton's legal team argued that his intellectual limitations placed him within this protected category. His last-ditch appeal was filed just days before his scheduled execution date. The defense presented what they described as recently developed evidence to support their claim. This evidence included an evaluation by a clinical psychologist who found that Burton had a mild intellectual disability. Various neuropsychological tests were also submitted as evidence. School records from Burton's youth were presented to demonstrate a history of difficulties. Supporting commentary from 7 people who knew him during his adolescence was also included, speaking to his limitations. The state of Texas rejected this claim of intellectual disability. They cited contradictory evaluations presented throughout the case's history. A clinical neuropsychologist evaluation commissioned by the state found evidence inconsistent with intellectual disability. The state's evidence against the claim included IQ tests from earlier in the legal process that were above the disability range. They also pointed to his appearance of being a prolific reader on death row. Furthermore, they noted that he did not require additional support services within the prison system. The outcome of these final appeals was unfavorable to Burton. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal without comment. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the petition was not timely filed. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the state's highest criminal court, also rejected the claim. Burton's defense team argued that the TCCA failed to follow the latest medical guidance regarding the assessment of intellectual disability. This legal back and forth highlights the complex and often contentious nature of applying clinical standards within a legal framework, especially in capital cases. The legal standard for intellectual disability in Texas has been a subject of significant debate and litigation for years. It involves assessing both intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior deficits. The defense argued that newer clinical standards provided a more accurate picture of Burton's capabilities. The state maintained that the evidence, particularly earlier evaluations and observations of his behavior, did not meet the legal threshold for intellectual disability. This disagreement underscores the difficulty in definitively diagnosing and proving intellectual disability, particularly decades after the relevant period of development. The courts ultimately sided with the state's interpretation and assessment of the evidence presented. The rejection of the intellectual disability claim removed the final legal barrier to his execution. It meant the courts found no constitutional impediment to carrying out the death sentence based on this specific argument. The legal system had run its course, exhausting the avenues for appeal on this ground. The debate over intellectual disability in capital cases remains a critical ethical and legal issue. It forces a confrontation with the purpose of the death penalty and who is deemed morally and legally culpable to face it. The line between intellectual impairment and legal responsibility becomes starkly visible in these cases. For advocates against the death penalty and those focused on social justice, cases like Burton's raise profound questions. They question whether the system adequately identifies and protects vulnerable individuals. They ask if the state's criteria for intellectual disability are truly aligned with clinical understanding and constitutional intent. Legal scholars analyze these cases to understand how courts interpret and apply Supreme Court precedent. The differing evaluations and the court's reasoning become case studies in the practical application of complex legal and medical standards. The timeliness ruling by the Fifth Circuit also highlights procedural hurdles that can prevent substantive claims from being heard. Victim advocates, while focused on the immense loss suffered by the victim's family, also grapple with the broader implications of the justice system's actions. The finality of execution intersects with the long-term impact of the crime and the legal process on all involved parties. The case becomes a point of reflection on the nature of justice itself. Texas residents, particularly those who follow capital punishment cases, witness the state carrying out its most severe punishment. Each execution prompts reflection on the state's use of the death penalty, its effectiveness, and its moral implications. The details of each case, including the legal challenges, contribute to the ongoing public discourse. The intellectual disability claim, in particular, forces a difficult conversation about culpability and mercy. It asks society to consider the mental capacity of those it condemns to death. It is a test of whether the legal system can adequately account for significant cognitive limitations. The evidence presented by both sides paints a picture of conflicting assessments. The defense saw a man with lifelong struggles, supported by recent testing and personal accounts. The state saw a man whose history and behavior did not meet their criteria for legal intellectual disability. The courts were left to weigh this conflicting evidence within the confines of legal standards and procedural rules. The rejection of the appeal meant that the legal system found no reason to halt the execution based on the argument that Burton was intellectually disabled. This decision closed the door on a claim that, if successful, would have spared his life. It underscores the high bar for proving intellectual disability in capital cases in Texas. The process highlights the adversarial nature of the legal system, where competing narratives about a person's life and capabilities are presented. The outcome is determined by how well each side can meet the legal burdens of proof and navigate procedural requirements. For Arthur Lee Burton, the legal battle over his intellectual capacity ended with the courts upholding his death sentence. In his final moments, Arthur Lee Burton offered a statement. He expressed remorse for his actions and the pain he had caused. His words were directed towards those he had hurt. He said, "To all the people I have hurt and caused pain, I wish we didn't have to be here at this moment, but I want you to know that I am sorry for putting y'all through this." This statement acknowledged the suffering of the victim's family and others affected by his crime. It was a moment of public reckoning with the consequences of his actions. He also expressed a hope for peace, both for himself and for others. He stated, "I hope that I find peace, and y'all can too." This reflected a desire for closure and healing, even in the face of his impending death. He offered other brief remarks. He thanked those who had prayed for him, including strangers. He then said, "Bird is going home," a phrase often interpreted as a reference to finding freedom or peace in death. His final words to the warden were, "Warden, I am good." These final words provide a glimpse into the condemned man's state of mind at the very end. They are often scrutinized for signs of remorse, acceptance, or defiance. Burton's statement focused on apology and a wish for peace. For the victim's family, these words may offer some measure of acknowledgement, though they can never undo the harm. For others, they are a somber reminder of the human being at the center of the legal process. They mark the transition from a life lived, however flawed, to its definitive end. The phrase "bird is going home" is particularly poignant. It suggests a release, perhaps from the confines of prison, or from the burdens of life itself. It is a personal expression of his understanding of what was about to happen. His final confirmation to the warden, "Warden, I am good," indicates a readiness or acceptance of the execution proceeding. It is a final interaction within the highly controlled environment of the death chamber. These last spoken words are the only public record of his thoughts in his final moments. The crime committed by Arthur Lee Burton had a lasting and profound impact on Nancy Adleman's family. They endured the trauma of her violent death and the subsequent decades of legal proceedings. Their lives were irrevocably altered by the loss. Nancy Adleman's daughter, Sarah Adleman, has publicly shared her experience. She wrote a memoir detailing her journey through grief and the complex process of forgiveness. Her book offers a deeply personal account of living with the aftermath of such a crime. The memoir explores the raw pain of losing her mother in such a brutal way. It also delves into the difficult and often nonlinear path towards finding a form of peace. Her writing provides valuable insight into the long-term emotional toll on victims' families. Sarah Adleman included pieces of her mother's poetry in the memoir. This act serves to honor her mother's memory and share her spirit with the world. It allows readers to connect with Nancy Adleman, not just as a victim, but as a person with her own voice and creativity. A particularly moving reflection in the memoir concerns forgiveness. Sarah Adleman wrote about her mother, in a spiritual sense, telling the killer that she forgives him and that God does too. This concept of forgiveness, even in the face of unimaginable pain, is a central theme in her healing process. She wrote that this idea of her mother's forgiveness opened the door to acceptance for herself. It suggests that finding a way to process the trauma involved confronting the act itself and finding a path towards releasing the consuming anger and pain. This does not diminish the horror of the crime, but speaks to the victim's family's resilience and capacity for grace. The family's experience highlights that the impact of a capital crime extends far beyond the courtroom and the execution chamber. It is a lifelong burden carried by those left behind. Their journey is a testament to the enduring power of grief and the challenging work of healing. Sarah Adleman's memoir serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of violent crime. It provides a voice for the victim and her family, ensuring that Nancy Adleman is remembered. It also contributes to a broader understanding of the complex emotional landscape faced by those impacted by tragedy. Their story is an essential part of the narrative surrounding this case. It grounds the legal and ethical discussions in the very real suffering caused by the crime. It reminds everyone involved of the life that was taken and the family left to mourn. The process of forgiveness described by Sarah Adleman is not about excusing the crime. It is about finding a way to live with the trauma without being consumed by it. It is a personal act of liberation from the grip of hatred and pain. For victim advocates, the Adleman family's story is a crucial example of the long-term support needed by those affected by violent crime. It underscores the importance of resources and understanding for families navigating grief, trauma, and the complexities of the justice system. Their resilience in the face of such loss is both heartbreaking and inspiring. The inclusion of Nancy Adleman's poetry ensures that she is remembered as more than just a statistic or a case file. She was a mother, a jogger, and a creative spirit. Her words live on through her daughter's efforts. The family's public sharing of their experience contributes to the broader conversation about crime, punishment, and healing. It offers a perspective that is often lost in the legal and political debates surrounding the death penalty. It is a story of profound loss and the difficult ongoing work of finding peace. The execution of Arthur Lee Burton closes a chapter on a brutal crime committed decades ago. It brings finality to a legal process that spanned over 25 years, yet it leaves behind complex questions and enduring pain. The debate over his intellectual disability claim highlights the challenges inherent in applying clinical standards within the rigid framework of the law. It forces us to confront who is eligible for the ultimate punishment and how we make that determination. The conflicting evidence and court rulings underscore the difficulty and gravity of these decisions. For legal scholars, the case provides material for analyzing the application of Atkins v. Virginia and the procedural hurdles in capital appeals. For social justice advocates and death penalty opponents, it is another example of the system's flaws and the irreversible nature of execution. It raises concerns about fairness and the potential for executing individuals with significant cognitive impairments. For Texas residents, it is a reminder of the state's continued use of capital punishment. Each execution prompts reflection on the values and principles that guide the state's justice system. It is a somber exercise of state power. For victim advocates and the Adleman family, the execution may represent a form of closure, but it cannot erase the past. Nancy Adleman's life was tragically cut short, and her family's grief is a permanent scar. Sarah Adleman's memoir ensures her mother is remembered and offers a powerful narrative of resilience and the search for peace. Arthur Lee Burton's final words, expressing remorse and a wish for peace, add a final, somber note. They are the last public utterance of a man whose life ended at the hands of the state. They stand in stark contrast to the violence of his crime. This case, like all capital cases, forces a confrontation with fundamental questions about justice, punishment, mercy, and the value of human life. It is a reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime and the heavy burden placed upon the legal system to respond. The finality of August 7, 2024, marks an end, but the questions and the pain linger.